Can everyone hear me? I think I'm supposed to start now. I miss seeing people's faces in the audience, but hola amigos y colegas. I'll go. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Hopefully it's interesting and thought provoking. I'm going to talk a little bit about DevOps dilemmas and some of these conflicts that we are all trying to experience or resolve. We don't want to experience them, but we will anyway. So I believe he talked a little bit about my past, but just in passing, I've been involved in DevOps days from the beginning. I was part of a bunch of amazing projects, and, open source infrastructure projects going back over 10 years. Participated in DevOps days, Velocity Conference, writing books for O'Reilly about web operations, and then recently joined Red Hat and focused on helping organizations change their behavior to get better outcomes with their technology investments. I also like to tell you a little bit about myself. I made a logo for myself, so you know what kind of narcissist you're dealing with, and also come in various configurations of hair and beard. So next time you see me, I might look very different, but don't be afraid. It's the same person, same monster. So I want to start by saying I wish I could speak your language, and I think that's relevant in a DevOps conversation, especially because in some real sense, what we're talking about is resolving conflicts between groups that don't necessarily understand each other. And I'm gonna speak to that a bit more, but I one day might be brave enough to try to give a speech in Spanish, but that is not today. So I'm going to speak in English, but I did make a few things in Spanish. And this is what I think is the most important DevOps things. And just so you know, I think that when we talk about communication and being able to communicate, it's very important that we're able to read, write, and to speak. And then last but not least, but especially for today, you can hit me on Twitter, post tweets on Twitter. And also, this is probably the fastest way to get my attention if you want to talk about more of this kind of stuff after the conference. We live in interesting times, and I think there's a few ways to think about that. We happen to be, you're listening to me literally, halfway across the world or a quarter way across the world, depending. And I think that's amazing. We also live in this time where I don't know how it is where you are. Hopefully you're safe, but where I've been living, it's not necessarily safest, and I haven't really left my house for about 6 months, only to get food. So related to this, and I'm going to keep coming back to this as well, and I think this is a central DevOps theme, is that everything's connected, right? And we live in this world where I'm speaking to you over the internet. You're able to learn all these ideas. You're able to take advantage of these technologies. You literally have access to every bit of technology for free that you would need to build Facebook, to build Google, to build the Amazon. You have access to that open source software at any time. But it also means you're competing with everywhere. Everything can cooperate with everywhere, and everywhere is essentially competing with everywhere. This is this theme that keeps getting repeated, and I think people say software is eating the world, or other ways of thinking about it. But the way I frame it, and I'm going to use this in a minute to define DevOps, or what I mean when I say DevOps, is that software is really optimizing human performance and experience. And I think humans important because I think we're important, and that's the most important. Humans are more important than technology. And if it's not optimized today, it will be. So we're seeing this in our lives. The world that we live in now is very different than one I was born into, and it's very different basically every single year. We take for granted these cell phones that have connection to the internet and the sum of all the human knowledge. We push buttons, people bring us food. Back when you could leave the house, you push a button, someone will come and get you in a car, and that's available in almost every part of the world now. I also think there's a little bit of confusion. Everyone wants DevOps, or they think they do, but here's what they actually want. Here's what you want. What you really want: scalability, availability, reliability, operability, usability, observability, all for free. And then this is maybe the most important: without changing anything. And just to make that point stronger, I'll make the text really big without changing anything. It's frustrating, and I'm sure some of you felt this before, but it's like easy to say things, and it's not always easy to do things. And doing is about changing behavior. So you see this as a problem. And I think this is a core, and I think this theme was expressed over and over the last 10 years of DevOps, but I feel like I kind of have some new language I think is really interesting to express this, and so I'm going to share that with you today. But DevOps is particularly hard because you can't do it by yourself. There's no one person that can do DevOps in an organization. You literally need people to work together to change together, and that makes it harder. So this is Andrew, or Little Ideas, definition of DevOps. DevOps is optimizing the human performance and experience of operating software with software, we love tools, and with humans, we love humans even more. And to make that point even stronger, I'll make that text really, really big. Humans, that's what's important here. DevOps is people. People working together. And the dilemma is that we all have selfish interests. So we all want what we want. So if you look at the kind of traditional IT, and this is a slide I used even before DevOps was a word, going back to 2008-ish, talking about IT and this wall of confusion between developers and operators. And in that traditional system, we don't really communicate with our language. We share emails and tickets, and sometimes we don't even see the other as human at all, and that makes people unhappy, or maybe worse. I don't know if you've ever worked at a place like this before, but this is not uncommon. And the problem here is that these are actually two different games, that developers are playing a different game than operators, and in order for them to win their game, they kind of need different things. And I'm going to talk about a bit about that. So there's this game on one side that's trying to go faster and create value. There's this game on this other side that's trying to create, efficiency and stability. One's trying to create more value, one's trying to drive down costs, simplification. And then you see this tension in lots of organizations between business units and central IT, where the developers in the business units want to get more customers, get to market, do things differently. But because of, especially the traditional way this is done, there's a lot of focus on controlling consumption and best practices and doing these things repeatedly. And that sort of puts everyone in a different framing, a different game. And so we work against each other. And this setting, this framing, these different games almost force us to be against each other. So the wall of confusion is not understanding the other game. And it's also not understanding that we have to win together, that you can't win one game without, like if you win and the other side loses, you kind of all lost, right? We're all on the same team. And no one can change this by themselves. And this is, we've seen a few phases of this, right? So going back, there's Puppet and Chef, and we still have those around, but then Docker came, and now it's Kubernetes, and there'll be another thing. But to me, the thing that changes more in an organization is not the tool changes, it's actually the rule changes. So going back to this notion of two games, and this also I want to shout out to a person on my team, Jade Bloom, who's a PhD at Carnegie Mellon, focused explicitly on organizations and societies and how they change their behavior, that you have these two games. And we already sort of talked about it, that you have one game that's trying to win, creating value, creating novelty, and one side that's trying to reduce the variation and create stability. And so the question is, what if we could connect these games together? Is there a way to win both games? And this is the language Jabe chose for his PhD work, is he calls there's this game in the middle that we can play, which he calls the scope economy. And it's really around platforms. And I'm going to introduce a little bit more of a definition of economy in a minute, but it's about connecting and winning the scale economy to the differentiation economy with this piece in the middle. So this is a new game that we can get in the middle. How do we actually get there? See, the thing we have to realize is there's things that start as innovations, they start as novelty, but they're probably better, especially if there's value across a bunch of different business units or a bunch of different development efforts, if they're managed in this shared common platform. And then There's also things that are being managed or over managed in the scale economy that would probably be better managed in this shared common platform. And so the act of bringing things into this middle place is called recommoning. And I would argue, and this is new language for me in a sense, but the most successful DevOps projects ever got this quality of bringing the people with their selfish interests together to come into the middle. And this is yet another Carnegie Mellon PhD who is talking about platforms, and he's the one that invented this word recommoning. So Demeje has done a bunch of work around this, and I'll just read it in English. So platforms may be understood more conceptually as a guiding principles that redefine two sides of a binary relationship that reveal the middle mass as an opportunity for intervention. Platforms can help us recommon resource management through new approaches to negotiation. So I think that last word is key, negotiation, bringing together two sides. And this is also stealing from Demeji, and he uses this word platform. He's not actually talking about technology. If you go read his research, what he's actually talking about in most cases, where he did most of his work, it's about groups of people managing shared resources have nothing to do with technology. Shared space in a co-housing or some kind of river, stream, whatever sort of resources are there, and it's all modeled. He uses this language platform and all these different kind of personas are modeled off of this indigenous practice from Nigerian villages. And I'm sure there's similar practices in indigenous people where you live right now. And so this is kind of just like a quick run through some of these roles. And so there's this town crier role that makes the meetings even possible and makes sure people have information. And if you think about, the larger sense of DevOps community, I think in some sense, I played the role of a town crier for like a global community to kind of come together and do some of this stuff. And that's giving us the opportunity to have this to share this time today. There's what he calls an exploiting commoner. So an exploiting commoner is someone who hasn't necessarily given up their selfish interests in favor of the collective interest, but is really just taking advantage of the commons. Then there's the stewarding commoner, who is really focused on not just taking advantage of the commons and exploiting it, but making sure that the commons is available on a continuous, ongoing basis. Scribe is someone who makes sure that you have the things in writing and it's written down. Oracle in Demeji's framing here is that you have data and then models, and you can kind of make predictions about certain things based on the data. And then this notion of an upstream ally is someone who isn't necessarily someone who's exploiting the shared resource, but has privilege or power that can help align and resolve some of those conflicts. And there's some more stuff, and if you want to, you can go read Demeji's actual dissertation. But this is just a really interesting framing when you think about what DevOps means. This is what I feel has actually happened in the most kind of successful DevOps engagement. So, are there good examples? Yes, there are. I'll read this in English. Remove friction from product development, high trust, low process, no handoff between teams. Don't do your own undifferentiated heavy lifting. Use simple patterns automated by tooling. Self-service cloud makes impossible things instance. This is not my words. This is actually from a presentation on Netflix Lessons Learned, and it was given by Adrian Cocroft, who now works at Amazon. But it's a great talk. It's probably like 6-7 years old now. But he's really just talking about this way to resolve and connect keeping promises about scale with promises about innovation. And I would argue every single one of these sort of cloud native companies built a platform like this by this process because they had to, and because there wasn't like a shared platform they could use. They had to build their own from scratch. And this is from the SRE book, which I think everyone should read, but I'm just going to read a small part today. SRE build framework modules to implement canonical solutions for the concerned production area. As a result, development teams can focus on the business logic because the framework already takes care of correct infrastructure use. So you have a piece of a module or a service that is giving self-service access to the developers to focus on their business logic while keeping promises to the infrastructure and the scale and efficiency side. So this is from the SRE book, Google describing building their common platform. And I would argue that the Borg is the scope economy construct. If you don't know what the Borg is, you should go read the Borg paper. It's really the kind of inspiration for Kubernetes. Kubernetes is also a scope economy construct. If you're not familiar, I'm sure you will be because I saw other talks on the schedule. And Kubernetes is really an open source global commons to build these local platform commons, which is like mind-blowing. I think that's really interesting to think about. Also, if you've read the SRE book or you know this language of what a service level objective is, it's essentially an exercise. SLO is a recombining exercise between the SRE and the software engineering, right? So they're keeping these promises to each other. So we have 3 economic rules. We have differentiation. You win by creating novelty. The scope, you win by creating more sharing and reuse. And then the scale, you win by creating more efficiency. And so in the highest performing version of this, you have novel value creation, self-service access to the developers while keeping all these promises to those reliable networking and storage primitives. This is kind of what I started to call a platform as an interface. So you're using that common in the middle to start to resolve these conflicts explicitly. This is what we call, I already introduced this language recombining. So what we want to realize here when we're talking about DevOps, and it's easy to focus on the tools, is that the problem we're trying to solve isn't really technical, and it's not really people, it's social technical. So it's the people and the technology together, and you have to solve both of them together as a single system. So another thing to keep in mind when we're doing this is that people will attach their identity to their tasks. This is also why it's hard to do these changes by yourself, because you have to get these other people to change or cooperate, and they will see change sometimes as an attack on their identity, that you're erasing who they are if you want them to work a different way. And they don't want to forget how we do things here. Like, this is how we do things, right? So this is a common pattern of resistance. And my advice to you is try to make them see their value in this new version and really frame them as heroes in the new version of how you're going to work together. So DevOps is not a project. It's not a thing you just do and now you have DevOps. It's the progressive accumulation of improved habits, better habits. And sometimes that's tools, and sometimes that's communication, and sometimes it's both together. So just to kind of come towards the end of this, I want you to take this and sort of think about it, that making new rules is actually more important sometimes than making new tools, and that in a lot of organizations, it's actually the rules that stop progress more than the tools. If you had better rules, then the tools wouldn't matter. So thinking about this dilemma where I set up, they have two people on playing different games. Let's change our game and try to recognize that the game that we're trying to win is getting people to work together, not optimize for our life as a developer or our life as an operator. And last but not least, or coming to the end, is DevOps is not, it's very simple. DevOps is very simple. It's always been simple. It's just not easy, precisely because no one can do it by themselves, and that we have these different things. So I've said this in a lot of different talks over the last few years, and I really believe it. Inspired people working together is the best methodology. People talk about Agile or different flavors of this or DevOps, and they argue about definitions, but inspired people working together is the best methodology. But I'm going to change it up. I'm going to add a new language. So inspired people commenting together, bringing and connecting the games they're playing together so that they can all win. This is the best methodology. Or to make it even longer, inspired people resolving their selfish interests in favor of their collective interests together. This is the best way to get results. So this is my call to action. Be inspired, work together, change yourselves, change your organization, change our world, right? And we talked a bit about selfish interest and collective interest, and there's so many other problems in the world that could be solved more effectively if we could all resolve our selfish interests in favor of our collective interests. And, podemos. Gracias. I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here to have conversations. So thanks so much for sharing this time with me today. I hope that you had a few new things to think about from this, and that the rest of the day and the rest of the presenters meet your expectations and you have a wonderful time. Stay safe. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation, Andrew. Ahora vamos a movernos a la presentación de Iván Camargo desde la ciudad de Bogotá, hablando sobre las consideraciones a tener en cuenta para elegir la perfecta plataforma para